All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Another eventful day. As you would have seen on the group, we've hit 800 members on the group, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I was hoping to get a lot of people to join because that would have been really cool. But 800 is absolutely amazing. So thank you so much, everyone who's joined and become a part of the group. It's fantastic that we've got these great speakers. They're just giving of their time and energy and knowledge, and I appreciate that so much. I'm so inspired by these guys. So I'm really hoping that you guys are too. So this afternoon, Carl Smorenburg is back with us, and he is going to be taking us through an edit of a landscape image. So he'll take you through all the specifics. At the moment, he's got his camera raw screen up there. So Carl, over to you.
Thanks very much, Vincent. Thanks for having me back.
Pleasure.
I'll try to keep it as simple as I can, but I thought I'll actually go through a couple of images, not only one, of how I go through my post-processing. And I'm gonna start right at the beginning with just a little bit of a raw. This is my raw image. As you can see on the right hand side, I've done nothing to it. This is at a place called Seshlavatebe in Lesotho, and I shot it with a polarizer and a soft grad ND grad. If you guys don't know what those are, it's just a square filter where half of it is like sunglasses and half of it is clear. And that's how I can control the sky.
So Carl,
yes.
that would be if you think back to the 70s, all sunglasses were grad sunglasses, dark brown at the top and clear at the bottom.
100%, yeah. So it's a really good filter to use to control the dynamic range, because your camera is not really good at well, mine is very old, but not very good at controlling dynamic range, very brights and very darks. So I use the filter to control that and bring back a whole lot of detail in my sky. And I just use the polarizer to mostly just darken a little bit of the foreground, and add a little bit of polarizing effect on the image itself. But it's that's all I use. Nothing special or anything like that. All right, so let me get going. The first thing I always do to any of my images, I do a lens correction, and I remove chromatic aberration. And you can do that in Lightroom. You can do that in Photoshop. It's all available. And then maybe I add a little bit of clarity and a little bit of vibrance. Vibrance is a little bit different to saturation, because it brings out all the colors that are not saturated. It saturates them. And that's basically all I do in my raw. I really don't do much. Depends on what image it is, but like for this image, I really don't do much. Okay, and then I open it up in Photoshop. All right, I'll just carry on working on this image. I've got a whole lot of images to play around with. The most important thing in Photoshop to learn is that it works on layers. I'm sure everybody knows it works on layers. But the most important thing is a layer mask. So if I make a layer mask or a layer with a mask on it, this little white thing over here that I'm circling with my mouse is the most important thing. Okay, a white one is called a reveal all, and a black one, I can change the color by pressing Control and I, is a hide all. Okay, and that's a very, very important thing. And I'll show you why right now. Just let me delete that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to just draw a line around half of it, create a levels layer mask, and I'm just going to adjust the midtones. and you'll see what will happen. Okay, so the reveal, or the white side, shows what I've done, and the hard all hides everything. Okay, that's very handy, especially when you're using hard all with the kind of processing that I do. Okay, right. Say I do a little bit of an adjustment. I can actually paint that little bit of adjustment back to certain areas that I want. So if I wanted to add a bit, make the foreground a little bit darker, okay, I can reveal the underlying layer basically. Okay, so that's a very important thing to remember with regards to my type of processing. Okay, so a lot of the processing I use a thing called luminosity masks. Okay, which I just spoke to Quentin a little bit earlier about them, and he's got the panel on his computer, but he's never used them. So
you weren't supposed to tell
that, and a lot
people
of people
that.
are a little bit daunted by them. a lot of people are daunted but really it's not really that difficult. Okay, so just the definition of a luminosity mask. A luminosity mask is basically a selection. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of what a selection is. Say I use my lasso tool. Okay, what have I actually done? I've made a selection. Okay, right, the luminosity mask is exactly the same thing, making a selection, but using different tones in the image. Okay, all right. And to make a luminosity mask, you have to go to your channels palette. Okay, you can find your channels palette under the window, under channels. All right, and under the channels palette, you'll find RGB, red, green, and blue. All right, and to make the first luminosity mask, all you have to do is press Control and RGB. Okay, and a whole lot of marching ants come up. All right, so what Photoshop has done, it's selected all those pixels in the image that are 50% to the brightest pixels in the image. All right, so if I show you exactly what I've selected, it comes out like a black and white image. All right, okay. Remember what I told you about the reveal all and hide all mask 2 minutes ago? Well, what does black do? It hides all, and what does white do? It reveals all. So if you look at this image in black and white, there are some white and there are some black. So basically, what I'm telling Photoshop to do is to hide or not do any work on some of the pixels and do some work on other pixels. Okay. So with that selection, I can just control 50% of the brightest pixels all the way up to the very brightest pixels. And you can see what it does. Okay. Right, not a very good example, but we'll get into that a little bit later. I'm going to go to this image now. This is just a black, a normal image that I've just filled with white, and I've pulled a gradient across it to make it completely black on the left-hand side and completely white on the right-hand side. Okay, so I'm going to do that same thing and give you an idea. Press Control and RGB, and you'll see that 50% of the lightest pixels all the way up to the brightest pixels have been selected. Okay, that's basically what it does. Okay, so I can also inverse that and get exactly the opposite, where I have 50% of the darkest pixels all the way to pure black. Okay, and that's the first dark and the first light luminosity mask. All right. So what I do is I've been doing this for about 10, 11 years. And the first person who came out of them was a guy called Tony Kuiper, an American guy. And he came out with these panels. There are a lot of guys other guys that do it, Greg Benz, Jimmy McIntyre, there's lots of them. but I think Tony Kuiper was the first one who came up with them. And he made these panels, which make it a lot easier for us to use. And I'm just going to get into it and show you how I would process my images using these luminosity masks. I don't only use luminosity masks, and luminosity masks are not the be all and end all. There are many, many different ways to do things on Photoshop, but this is just one of them. All right, so I've showed you with RGB. You can also make luminosity masks with red, green, and blue. Okay, so if we look at the sky, what color is the sky mostly? It's blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a set of blue luminosity masks. I just press a button and it automatically does that for me. And then I'm going to scroll through these blue luminosity masks and make a selection of which one best suits the sky. Okay, so that's a blue lights 1. Okay, it's an overall image. Let me go to blue lights 2. Okay, that's a better selection of the sky. Blue lights 3. Okay, that's not such a good. So blue lights 2. So we're going to use blue lights 2. I'm going to make a selection. I'll make a selection by just pressing Control. Like I said, there's many ways of doing this, but and there are newer panels. This is the version 4. There's a version 7 now of these panels, but I'm using the version 4. Okay, so I've made the selection, and now what I'm gonna do an output. Okay, I'm gonna use levels for the output, and I'm going to actually manipulate my mask. I'm not going to touch my image, but I'm going to manipulate the mask to make a better selection of the sky. So to view the mask, all you do is you press Alt, and then I'm going to manipulate it. So I'm going to go up to Image and Adjustments, and I'm going to choose Levels. So this Levels adjustment is only going to work on the mask. It's not going to work on the image at all. Okay, so I'm going to pull the white slider over, and I'm going to pull the black slider over. All right. Okay, remember what I said about white reveals and black conceals? So I'm going to use a black paintbrush, and I'm just going to paint that foreground because I don't want the foreground to come through. I don't mind if it comes through a little bit on the transition zone, the zone between the sky and the sky in the foreground, and then I'm just going to use the dodge tool, and I'm going to paint away a bit more of that sky. Okay, so I've got quite a nice selection of my sky now. Not perfect selection, but a nice selection. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add contrast to my sky. So I'm going to pull the black slider over until where I feel like I'm getting a lot more detail. All right, can you see that? All right. So now, that's not the only thing we can do with the sky. So we've made that selection. We can add a bit of vibrancy to that. And then we can add maybe a little bit more contrast to that sky. Maybe brighten it up a little bit. And then just have a look at the before and after. Okay, so it's made a really, really big difference with just 3 little layers. Then what I do is I take those 3 layers and I put them in a group. Okay, and I can rename that group called Sky. All right. Okay, the next thing I do is I want to work on the foreground. So I make a selection for the sky and I just inverse it very simply. I'll use levels again and I'll just play with a little bit of the contrast in the foreground. So I'll bring the highlights up and play with the midtones. I don't want things to blow out, so you've got to be really careful here. And we have a look. And that's done quite a nice job of just adding a little bit of contrast into the foreground. I'm just checking my edges to see if my edges are all okay. And my edges are all looking really good. All right. And the same with the foreground. I can add a bit more contrast to it and brighten it up a little bit. And just add a bit of saturation or a bit of vibrancy. And then let's just group them again. So in basically 6 layers, you can completely transform your photo. All right.
It's very cool, because then obviously you can then take, well, if you just want to work on the highlights, you sort those out, and it's all separate,
Yes.
and it's all in layers, and it's non-destructive.
Very much so. Yeah. And it's all self-feathering. Okay, so there's no halos, there's no funny edges. As you can see on the edges of my between the sky and the horizon, there's no funny edges or anything like that. And I've got rid of all the chromatic aberration. So it makes a really, really big difference. From here, I just go into finishing my image. Okay, so stuff like dodge and burn and stuff. Not that I think this image really needs it. For me, that big footprint in the front of the image needs to be changed. That's my big footprint, actually. But we'll get rid of that without anybody seeing too much.
Yeah, you know this is recorded, right? They can see what you've done.
I'm just using a patch tool to get rid of that. Also, I try to get rid of like any distracting bits in the foreground that I don't really like. Like just like a little white thing like that would bug me. Whoops, that didn't. Just let me duplicate that and flatten it. Control D. Okay, there we go. So just a little thing like that would really bug me. So I'd get rid of something small like that. Okay, then obviously dust spots, etc., etc., etc. I would have done in the beginning. I didn't go there. I don't want to do that now because it's just time consuming and takes forever. And then one of the last things I would really do on an image like this is a thing called midtones. All right, so midtones are basically all the pixels minus the darkest darks and the brightest brights. And then I would add a little bit of bit more contrast into this image to really make it pop. As you can see, it very subtle, but it makes a difference. Okay, and then I don't know. Most of the time, I don't sharpen my images until I print them. But I have got a sharpening action that I use, which is a high pass sharpening method. But I find the edges and I blur the edges so that I don't get those little white halos on the edges. So that's the first image that I've done for you. Pretty simple. I know luminosity masks are a little bit complicated, but they're not really difficult. Let's go through another image. I've done the raw in this image.
Carl,
so
I think the cool thing about the luminosity masks is the fact that you don't get those sort of I don't know, ghosted blur around the things. I mean, every time I look at a landscape or a cityscape and I see that, I just think, makes you want to go in and try and retouch them a little bit, and that's what kills it.
Yeah, the really good thing about them is the actually they self-feathering, so they feather for you. Because it doesn't work on edges, it works on pixels. It really does help. So let's do another image. Okay, so this is the amphitheater. It was actually a wonderful day. I was with I took a guy called Carl Gage. He's also a landscape photographer based in Cape Town, up to the Drakensberg with me, and we were actually walking to our camping spot, and we were lucky to have this inversion and dramatic weather. And then these grasses, they're actually quite high. They're about 1 meter high, and I really love that. And I use them as my foreground. Okay, so we're going to do a similar kind of thing to what we did last time. Use luminosity masks. I always use the blue luminosity mask for sky, because I always think it's a better selection. So same thing again. I just scroll through the luminosity masks till I find which one is going to be the best for my sky. And I think the best one is blue 2 again. So I'm going to select that. Use levels again. and just manipulate my mask. I'm a big fan. That's also what I really love about luminosity masks. You can manipulate them. You can make a selection and you can manipulate your mask. Okay, so just trying to get rid of the foreground and the mountains and make a really good selection of the sky. Just get rid of a little bit more in that foreground. I don't really want it to change the foreground now. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then we'll just use that dodge to get rid of a little bit more there.
Yeah, you can see how the the edge on the grass there. It's not a hard edge. It's got a little bit of a couple of tones towards the dark as well.
No, definitely. See, that's a big transition area. This area here between the grass and the mist is a transition area, and you want to be really careful with that so that it doesn't look weird. Okay, and then we can just manipulate the sky again. So I've just made it darker, basically. That's all. And I'll add a bit more contrast into that sky as well, maybe a little bit brighter. And we've got so much more detail just in those two little steps. Okay, no halos, no funny few dust spots, but no funny little artifacts or anything like that. It really makes a big difference, and it really makes that image pop quite a bit. It is a little bit blue, so maybe I would take a little bit of the blue out of it. And let's have a look. Okay, that looks very natural to me. Okay, same again. Make a group. Okay, make that selection. Inverse it. And I can start working on that grass. Okay, same again with the grass. I'm just going to brighten it up and then play with the midtones. What I'm trying to do here is trying to match the background and the foreground. This is in this image. So not make them miles apart.
Carl?
Yes.
So I've got a question which I could have answered, but I'm going to let you do it. Nobby wants to know, do you feather the edges to a specific setting?
No, I don't feather the edges. The luminosity masks feather them for me. So I don't feather them at all. The luminosity mask self feathers. Okay. So if I go back to that selection I made, I'm only selecting the light tones, and I'm not selecting the dark tones. Okay, so I'm not feathering anything, or there's no feathering at all in that regards. Okay, yeah. I hope that helps.
Yeah, because it's the luminosity mask that's got a range of tones that it selects. So it's not a hard edge type of thing. If you mentioned 256 colors, the highlights may select 70 or 100.
No, it won't really do that. It doesn't really select. It only selects black and white, really. Yeah. Honestly, it's the light pixels and the dark pixels. That's all. It doesn't differentiate between color or anything like that. It's only the light and the dark pixels. So if I go through these luminosity masks, the white is selected and the black is hidden. All right. So the black is hidden. So if I do an adjustment, nothing's going to happen to the black pixels, but it's all going to happen to the white pixels. Okay. I know it's quite a thing to get your mind around.
Yeah, especially when you're used to the lasso tool.
I'm selecting the grass. Okay. Yeah, it's no lasso tool. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I'm actually selecting pixels based on brightness. Okay, or darkness. Okay.
Yeah. I just got another question from Michael Lewis.
Yes.
He asks, isn't luminosity masks similar to HSL in selective color?
I
don't know.
It's not really, because HSL is working on hue, saturation, and luminance. It will be on the luminance side. It'll what the HSL slider does on the luminance side. It makes things brighter and darker. Luminosity masks don't make things brighter and darker. They only make a selection. So luminosity mask is only a selection. It doesn't do anything. You actually have to add a layers level to manipulate the luminosity mask. Okay.
Cool.
So so it's not, it doesn't do anything. It's just a selection. I think that's what's really difficult for people to understand, is that it doesn't do anything. It only selects things. I'll go through. I mean, I'll add all these light ones. Okay, so these are all the light luminosity masks. So all it's doing is selecting the light pixels in the image. Okay, so from 50% above to the very brightest. So those are obviously the very brightest pixels in the image. Okay, so it's all it's doing is selecting those. It doesn't do anything to them. All right. Let me carry on. So on the left-hand side of this image is that grass is pretty bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a burn layer. And the burn layer is pretty simple to make. It's you make a blank layer. You go to Edit, Fill, and then 50% gray, and then you just change your blending mode to overlay, and that's basically a burn layer. There's new ways where they use different techniques, but for me it works perfectly fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint that grass a little bit darker with a low opacity of my paintbrush, just to make it blend so that it's similar to the other grass in the image. Okay. All right, then, like I always do, I'm just doing this very simply so people get a bit general idea. I normally do quite a bit more elaborate workings on the image, but I'm just doing it generally so people got it's not such a huge daunting thing to them. And then I really wouldn't do much more to that image. Maybe a little bit of dodge and burn in the grass to make that pop. Let's do that while we're here.
What I've done, Carl, is I've put the link to Tony Kuiper's actions in the chat, so people can go and have a look at that and look around, see what they can do with it.
100%. Also, I am doing I'm doing quite a few during the lockdown. I'm doing quite a few Photoshop lessons via Skype. So if anybody's interested in doing a couple of lessons via Skype, they can just contact me on my Facebook page. I think it's on the details there.
Cool. I'll put it in there as well. It is on the bio, but I'll put it in there as well.
No, perfect. Thank you. Right. So a bit of dodge and burn on the grass. So I'm just going to do try and bring it a little bit of more contrast in those grasses out, just very subtly. And then let's just do a bit of a wrong one. Burn. I'm just going to try and make this corner here a little bit darker as well, so it's less distracting. Yeah, maybe that's a bit too much, but, so that's basically it. It's very simple. Okay, so that's the basics of what I do with my processing. The next thing I want to do is just get into a little bit more detail and start working on certain aspects of an image. This is an image taken in the Drakensberg. It's a place called Mweni. It's in the northern Drakensberg. If you get to go here, you must definitely go. It's absolutely spectacular. But also with regards to luminosity masks, what you can do and what you can't do, especially with regards in this image, specifically with water. Okay, so you can really make your water pop. I like to shoot my water at about 1/6 of a second. I don't like that completely whitewashed water. I like a little bit of detail in it, and I like to bring out quite a lot of detail. So with luminosity masks for this kind of thing, I would use midtones and just look at the water. Forget about anything else in the image, and I would play with the contrast of that water, and just look at the before and after, and then create a group, and then hide it, and then just paint back just paint back part of the water that I want. Am I using the right paintbrush? I'm not even using the right paintbrush. Okay, and then paint back the contrast that I want in that water. So
I'll go back and delete that part.
all right. I'm nervous here. I'm nervous. All right. And then you can see the difference between the water before and after. There's quite a lot more detail that I brought out into the water by just doing one little thing. Okay. Also blending modes. So if you're using one image, I was using one image here. If I want to add make my sky a little bit darker, I'll use those blue luminosity masks again, make a selection. Okay, and just manipulate the masks quickly. And I'm just putting a disclaimer out there. Everybody's got different methods. You might not like my methods, but I like my methods. But so I'm just going to make a very definite selection of the sky. And I'm just going to burn to get a really good edge and paint up my foreground. I know I'm doing it really quick, but I'm just trying to demonstrate one specific thing. Okay, so everybody's heard of blending modes, these things. You've seen them before, obviously, Quentin. Yeah. You can use blending modes to darken my sky. So if I press multiply, it darkens the sky, and then I can play with the opacity and bring it back to where I think it's quite nice. Okay, and then work from there on maybe a bit of contrast. All right. Okay. So that's the other thing. So using blending modes and using mid-tones. Also blending modes to bring out, to make the shadows brighter. So if I make a selection of my shadows, let's just see which ones. Okay, so I use that luminosity mask. And I use screen. You know what screen is? And I use screen, and screen will make things lighter. And then I can play with the opacity until I'm happy with the way it looks. I can also use my levels. All right. So there are millions and millions of ways to skin a cat. Right, moving on. Any more questions? Everybody happy? All right. So
everyone's fairly happy at the moment.
all right.
I'm just going to do a quick roll through here, but it looks like it's all good. So, did you see my 30-minute notice?
I did. Yes, sure.
Fantastic.
No
problem. I'll delete that part as well, so that it can come across more professional. That I didn't ask you.
No problem.
Carry on.
So then luminosity masks are also really fantastic at blending images. Okay, so I'm a big fan of blending images together. So this photo is taken at the hole in the wall, the whale tail. Do you know where the whale tail is? It's on the left-hand side by the hole in the wall. So this image, we can use luminosity mask to blend different parts of the images back. Remember what I said, luminosity masks select different pixels, bright pixels and dark pixels. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this dark image and I'm going to put it over this very light image and I'm going to hide it. Okay, remember a white mask reveals and a black mask conceals. And then I'm going to make a selection of all the very bright pixels in the image. I'll just go through all these light ones. Okay, so for me that's a good one. And then what I can do is I just paint with a white paintbrush all the detail I want back into the image.
Seems a bit like witchcraft.
It's not really fair, hey?
No, it's not.
So, and if we look at the edges, again, there's nothing funny going on with the edges or anything like that. And basically with two little steps, going from there to bringing it back. It's not 100% perfect, so we'll play around. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all the dark pixels and just try and recover some of the areas that I think were affected when I blended the image together. So I'm just going to manipulate this again. So what I think has happened is that some of it has bled over onto these cliffs. So I'm going to paint back a bit of brightness into those cliffs. I'll play with the contrast of there we go, perfect. All right, and that's a lovely blend. Okay, then what I'll do is I will, you can play with the contrast of the lower image by just selecting the background. I'm just going to use curves for this one. I'm just going to darken the image a little bit to make it sort of blend a lot easier. And then we have a look at the before and after. All right. Okay, now I can start working exactly the same as what I did with those other images. I'll start working with the contrast of the highlights. I think I'll select lights 2. It all comes with a bit of time, and just add a bit of contrast into that, that light 2. And let's have a look at the, make a group. Look at the before and after. Okay, so I don't like what it's done in some areas. So I'm just going to paint back a bit of the brightness in other areas. Maybe a little bit more there, bringing out that brightness. Okay, perfect. All right, okay, and then I'm just going to work. So we're going to call that the brights. That's right, not brights. Okay, and then I'm going to work exactly on the opposite, the shadows. We'll just use brightness and contrast. And I'm going to just make the shadows a little brighter. Actually, I'm working on the highlights, not on the shadows. Forgive me.
Yeah, focus now. Focus. Right. People are watching.
Make the shadows a little brighter and add a bit of contrast to them. Okay, and then maybe add a little bit of vibrance too. Just make it a little bit, and a bit of saturation. Okay, and then group those and call it shadows. I also use Nik software quite a bit, especially a thing called Viveza. So Nik software is a plugin you can buy for Photoshop. And I only really use one thing in the whole of Nik software. It's called structure. And what it does, I'll just do it fully and then bring it back. It adds micro contrast to, there's many ways of adding micro contrast, but this adds micro contrast, and I like what it does. But I never really go above 20%. Okay, so I'll do that. What it can do, the structure is add noise to your sky. So I don't really like that. So what I'll do is I'll just add a mask with only the shadows in it. And you can see that it would have changed the microstructure of the, you can see how it's changed a little bit. Very, very minuscule, yeah. Okay. And then from here, just a little bit of dodge and burn to carry on playing with the contrast. So the whole thing of luminosity masks and playing with this whole stuff is all about playing with contrast, basically. I haven't changed any colors or anything like that. All I've done is played with the contrast. And playing with the contrast makes things just pop.
I think it's
Just a
incredible
little
that
bit of dodge and burn.
with a couple of really a couple of minutes, you can take two images, one that is for the highlights, one for the shadows, which separately were really not great, but combine them into a fantastic image.
100%, 100%, yeah.
The more time you
And
spend, obviously, the
that's
better
the
it will
beauty
be.
behind it. Yeah. And that's basically the finish. The finish. I wouldn't really do much more with that image. Is my horizon skew? It is skew. It is straight. Yeah. So basically, starting with that, we've ended up with that.
Yeah,
And that's the
very
power
cool.
of luminosity masks. All right. Let's do. We got a little bit more time, so let's do one or two more. So I'm trying to just give different examples of different images that I've taken that I would use different things to use. So this one is of a cave. If you watch my talk, when was it, on Friday? Then I had this image, and so this is basically the raw image, and I've manipulated it a little bit to bring out a bit of the details. And I wouldn't really do much more. I just want to see if I've done my, okay. Okay, let's open the image.
So here's a question while that loads.
Yes, sure.
The sign in the middle there, is that affixed to the ground with long metal poles, or could you have moved it?
It's affixed to the ground with long wooden poles.
Right. Okay. Well, then ignore my question and moving straight on.
It's quite a new thing. It's quite a new thing. It's only been there the last time I was at Shehlabatebe in November. So, but we can just get rid of that by the wonderful Photoshop content aware.
Mm-hmm. There's so many fantastic tools in Photoshop that work really, really well. I have to say, they've saved me a number of times.
It has, yeah. Okay, so starting again with this kind of image, the first thing I always do is I look at the sky. So here I want to add a bit more drama to my sky. So I'm going to use, I'm going to have a look at blue luminosity masks and see how we go from there. All right. Okay, so blue doesn't really make a difference. It's not a really good selection. The problem with the sky is that the right-hand side of the sky is dark and the left-hand side of the sky is a bit lighter. So there's another way. If you can't make a luminosity selection, then I use a thing called color range. Have you heard of color range before, Quentin?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm just going to press on color range and just play with the fuzziness and then press OK. And then add it to a mask. And then I'm just going to refine the mask like I do with all those other things. All the luminosity marks that I've done before, and then just use a bit of dodge and burn again. No questions, because no one knows what's going on. I think that's the big problem here.
No, I reckon their mouths are all hanging
half the time. I don't know
what's going on, and how you can combine the images, and it just looks fantastic. You know,
half the time I don't know what I'm doing as well. Don't worry. So I've made my selection of the sky, not a perfect selection, and I can just pull it back until I'm happy with sort of where it is. Okay, so it's made quite a big dramatic difference to my sky. It has affected my mountains, and I don't like that. So I'll correct that by using a dark mask. So you can do very specific things, and but it just takes time. So we'll use that mask. I'm just going to manipulate that mask as well. Okay, and I'm just going to paint back a little bit of that where it's adjusted. Whoopsie, wrong one. Using the wrong. There we go. We'll bring some of those highlights back. I don't know if you can see that, but it makes it. It does make a difference. I'll undo it. Okay, so the tops of the mountains. I can just bring those highlight back.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, I can see that.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay, so from there we can just inverse the selection and start working on a bit of contrast. Maybe darken it down a little bit, add a bit more contrast on the inside of the cave. Add a bit of vibrancy and a bit of saturation, and then maybe just bring a bit more detail in the cave roof. Let's just use those dark. Let's just use those dark luminosity masks. So I just want to really work on the cave roof and bring a bit of detail back out in that cave roof. And let's pull it.
I've got a question for you.
Yes, sure.
It's a very good question from Jose Pinheiro.
Okay.
He's said, hi Quentin, but I'm going to put it to you because you're our speaker for today. Just a question, but do pro photographers hardly use the original photos they take without any software change to the photo before it goes to print or publishing?
I don't think any professional would not do any software changes whatsoever. If you understand what digital photography is and the format that we shoot in RAW, you'll understand why we do this. It looks like I'm doing a lot of drama and tomfoolery here, but what I'm really trying to do is get it to look like it looked when I was right there. Because the raw image is pretty flat and there's very little contrast, very little saturation. So, I mean, it's a good question, but I don't think unless you're shooting film, but even the guys shooting film use a darkroom. So all I'm trying to do is really get the image to look like what I saw.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing with shooting in RAW is that it gives you the best possible starting point from a point of view of quality and dynamic range and all of those sorts of things, you know. But you know, second to that, you know, I think every photographer's got their own style. You know, some want to be a little bit more dark and moody, and others want to be a bit more bright and light, etc. So you know, you'd have to work on it.
No, 100%. I agree 100%. It's a lot of it is your own style. A lot of it is what you like and what you don't. I'm not a big advocate of like, I don't know if you know what focal length blending is. So if you're taking a seascape and you got a mountain range in the far back, a lot of photographers will like take a beautiful image of the foreground and then zoom in, take some photos of the mountain, and then blend them back in together so the mountains look closer. So I'm not a big advocate in that. But I am a big. All of these luminosity masks, all I'm doing is either darkening or lightening stuff. I've hardly used any saturation or anything like that. I have hardly done any of that kind of stuff. All I'm doing is playing with contrast. Contrast adds a bit of a saturation to the image already when you're adding. So it's not. Here I am defending myself. I shouldn't be defending myself, but it's I'm not manipulating the image, okay, or superimposing anything on anything. All I'm doing is playing with contrast.
Absolutely, and
nothing
also,
else.
at the end of the day, you know, as there's different ways to look at it. You know, you can be a technical photographer that's out to, you know, sort of technically recreate what was there. But a lot of times as human beings, you know, you remember the way the wind, brushed your arms, and the smell of the river, and those sorts of things, and that, influences the way that you're going to edit that picture as well. You just get a feeling for it, and you just keep pushing it to where it feels right for you.
No, sure, 100%, 100%. I like to make it look like I saw it. I might overdo it a little bit, but it's up to you. It really is up to you. But this is what I do. I don't know I don't really. I think I think a big thing that's been going on over the last year or so is that there's been a huge debate between like East and West, the East being Europe and the West being America, where the Americans like to manipulate a lot of landscape images and transform things and make things bigger and smaller, where the Europeans are more conservative and don't really do that at all. So there's been a big debate of who's right and who's wrong. But I think let's whoever wants to do what they want to do. I think the big thing is if you're doing that, thank you. If you're doing that, then rather say that, okay, this image is manipulated. I've stretched the mountains or something like that. But it's your style. You can do it. But rather just be honest about it and say, okay, this is what I've done. This is what I haven't done. I think for me that would be more important. But everyone to their own. So it's if you want to do it that way, perfect. Yeah. Okay, carrying on with this image, I'm just going to do a little bit of dodging and burning. So just bring out a little bit of detail in the cave and on the grasses, and then a bit of dodging and burning. Normally, I'd take quite a while to add a little bit of dodge and burn, yeah, to certain areas, just to really make the contrast pop. And that's basically it. So starting image and finishing image. All right. Okay, do you want to do another one? How do we got 10 minutes? You say?
Yeah, we got about,
let me try and find another one.
7 or 8 minutes. While you do that, I've got a question from Siobhan.
Sure.
She finds Photoshop intimidating with all the options, etc. What would be the top 5 things to do with an image to make it pop, but still leaving it as close to the original as possible? That's a difficult question.
Contrast. It's just contrast. Just add a bit of contrast. Make sure that you shoot the image correctly first, and you watch your histogram when you're taking the image. And then secondly, just add a bit of contrast and a bit of vibrancy. A bit of contrast and a bit of vibrancy always makes a big difference, if you ask me. And that's about it. I mean, if just let me delete that image and reload it with the raw. So if you're shooting in raw, sorry, what's her name again?
Siobhan. Her name is Siobhan.
Okay, Siobhan. So if you're editing an image just in raw, hopefully you are shooting it in raw. You can just bring out a bit of the shadows, play with a little bit of the contrast, add a bit of clarity. This is an older version of Photoshop, so it doesn't have dehaze, etc., etc. Add a bit of vibrance and add a bit of saturation, and that'll make the image pop. Just remember to do remove your chromatic aberration and do a lens correction, and that'll really make your image pop. So from there, from a flattish image to an image with a bit of contrast and a bit of vibrancy and a bit of color, that can make your image pop quite a bit.
Absolutely. What you also said, a little bit early on about making sure that you get as much of that full dynamic range as possible. Your highlights and everything. You need to make sure that you've got them to start off with, and that's obviously why the raw. but you have to have those all there, because if you've got some of that that's blown or your blacks are completely crushed, that's going to be a problem. Yeah.
I think the fundamentals are the most important thing, and people don't use the histogram. It drives me insane. How can you not use the histogram? I'm just going to edit while I talk. You've got to use your histogram to take a photo. That's the basis of all digital photography is, and digital photography is all about gathering data. So the more data you have, the more you can manipulate it. I know that sounds like I'm manipulating, but you are manipulating in a certain sense. But the more information you have, the more you can do with it, or the more you can bring out in an image. I mean, this is just 2 little layers, and it totally transforms an image completely. But also knowing what to do and what not to do. Also, Siobhan, if you practice, it sounds silly, but if you practice every day 20-30 minutes on Photoshop, your Photoshop will increase exponentially over a couple of months. I know it's intimidating, but in a couple of months, you can vastly improve your Photoshop skills. And there's so much information out there, so much information on YouTube. You can teach yourself basically anything. It's just a matter, are you willing to put the time in? All right. And I'll just finish this image off with a little bit of a mid-tone. All right. Just to add a bit more drama. There we go. Right. And there we go.
Fantastic.
Okay.
So I don't know how much time we've got left. As I said, Facebook likes to just chop it off unceremoniously at an hour.
Oh, sure. Well, thanks very much for having me. I hope I've inspired some people to take up luminosity masks. But you can just see what you can do with them. It really has, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, just the demonstration alone, I think will blow people's minds. But there's so many different options, so many different ways to do it, and I think it's definitely going to. I think it's going to be some people sitting on their garage roofs this afternoon with their tripods shooting a sunset, and then they're going to try luminosity masks to pull it all together. So. And I hope so, yeah. So I just, first of all, I wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time to come back and do this live edit. I think it was a fantastic idea.
Great.
I have put your Facebook link on the chat itself, where the guys are doing the discussion. And if you, Siobhan, think about it, maybe if you want to ask Carl for a bit of a Photoshop lesson, because he's doing them online. So yeah, just go for it, enjoy. And again, back to you, Carl. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. You're
thank you very much.
Superstar and very generous with your time. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Quinton.
All right. Thank you. Cheers, guys.